Heads up to all our listeners, this is the last episode of this season. We'll be taking a brief hiatus for a couple of weeks. Our website has gone through a major brand review, so you will see Transfin Podcast also aligned with the new look. And we also have a bit of equipment coming in, Sharad, isn't that?
Yeah, no, I'm excited. So the quality should improve. Content is always improving, but now we'll have some technical improvement as well.
Yeah, so we're getting new mics, table stands, an interface. So hopefully our voice will be much clearer. So we'll just need a few days to set that all up. And exciting pipeline of guests are already ready. So yeah, just a heads up. Thank you guys. Enjoy the show. Hey folks, welcome to another exciting episode of LongShorts, our usual weekly banter with and without guests. But I'm happy we have another guest today. We have Mr. Shivam Singla, founder of Leegality. We'll kind of obviously give a shout out to him and get started. But in addition to Shivam, there's Sharad Tupran. Hi Sharad, man. How's it going?
I'm no longer the usual suspect.
Oh, you're not the usual suspect. For 2 weeks running now.
Yeah, it's good. I'm excited about today's chat as well. We've, after a series of finance and fintech and renewables, we've come back to a legal chapter. I remember Kushan was our first legal resource.
Yeah, and I think in case of Shivam as well, I think he's kind of probably taken a bit of a segue from his pure legal roots, but it's quite exciting to have him. Obviously, all our listeners do search for Transfin Podcasts on Spotify, Apple, JioSaavn, so that you get that, and hit subscribe so that you get that nice little notification every time an episode goes live. So welcome Shivam. You run Leegality, which from your website provides Aadhaar e-sign solutions, has built document workflow tools, and I'm sure many other things which are not on your website right now, which are in the pipeline. You're a lawyer by training, I guess. You were from NLS.
Right.
And I think you straight away after your grad school jumped in, right?
Right.
Not much of a gap.
Not much of a gap.
So yeah, no, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And please, I think we typically start from the start in terms of, after law school, you, I guess, must be thinking of, joining a law practice, but entrepreneurship probably hit you harder and you went for it. So how did it all kick off?
So actually, this thing kicked off even before law school, as in NLS was a 5-year degree.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of by the mid of the third year, I had already interned at a couple places, at a couple legal places.
Right.
I had already gone through half of the courses, and beyond, after going through that, I wasn't much. It didn't seem like it struck a chord that this is something which I want to do throughout my life.
Right? I mean, though, the practice of law.
Getting into very core law, doing everything I did in my internships.
Right.
So at that time I came across, a senior of mine, Aruj Garg, was running this startup called Bhukkad.
Yes.
So he was a fourth year of mine, and I had used to interact with him a lot. It was quite impressive at that time for me that he was in law school. While in law school itself, he had started a food tech, food. Initially, it was a food outlet, and once he graduated, he also took it up full time, and the idea was he was transforming it into a food tech business. This was the food tech boom when all these Zomatos, Swiggy, Runner, all of these startups were just coming up.
And that's probably not a typical profile of a law student, right?
Right. So this was very exciting to me, the fact that someone so close to me was doing something so different, doing something so challenging. So by fourth year, I started working with him part-time. I tried out my hand at a couple other startups during my holidays just to see how a non-legal internship would look like.
Yeah.
And that also didn't work out well for me. So I thought Bhukkad might be I just wanted to give another shot with Bhukkad.
Yeah.
And so I worked there. I used to work there part-time in the sense that it was more, my college seemed more part-time than my work Bhukkad was. I used to, I don't know whether I should say it, but I used to bunk a lot of classes and all, usually. So that was my...
It's too late to worry about that now.
So that was used to be that was all over my head at that time. This was in my 4th year. This was the time when the food tech boom was happening. Booker, Swiggy just started like a few houses away from us. Swiggy did their beta with us at that time. Runner was another startup which later got acquired by Zomato. At that time, we were closely working with them. They did their beta with us. Fresh Menu and all these food companies were just there. Fasos, like everything it was the food tech boom. And I was in the middle of Koramangala there. Our store outlet, one of the outlets was in Koramangala. Flipkart office was right next to us. Instamojo and all, like it was the middle of Koramangala. So, and I, at this time while working with Booker, I also started, I once shot a mail to Shraddha from Your Story, saying that I want to write, and she also accepted, and then I started writing with Your Story also part-time. I did this for a year or so, and this just entrenched me into the startup ecosystem. And alongside this, my real sister was a CXO at Jugnu.
Okay.
And another cousin of mine, a very close cousin of mine, was also doing agri-tech startup. So all these things grouped together I was just like everything about startups.
Deep in the space.
You didn't have too many choices. Everything pointed.
There was no way that I could have even thought of coming back to law, because I was so, and even in college, like my only the biggest the thing I used to do is like I tried wherever I used to see an opportunity to get into any kind of event management, I used to just get into that. And so by the end of my final year, I was convinced that law is definitely not something I want to get into as a core profession of law. And I also didn't want to continue with Booker, because again I realized that food again is something probably which I don't feel too comfortable with. So then I was looking at, and by this time I was convinced that I want to start something.
So this was like timing wise
2006. This was first quarter of 2016.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So by the second quarter of 2016 I graduated. And then at that time I just tried to touch base with a few friends from school. One of them was running a small legal online platform. And that's how we started talking on that, if we want to do something, and that conversation didn't work out. But that led me to that by that time, by the end of that conversation, I was convinced that being a lawyer, I want to ensure that I can tap on my lawyer background. And also, and then obviously, like having seen law is not something which is very optimal, right? Like the processes around law in the legal profession are very, very archaic, right? There's everything on paper, there's just everything is manual, everything is repetitive. So I knew like there's little technology in law. And being a lawyer, I saw that I could be like, I am in a good position that I can do something in law and I will be taken seriously. Right. So that's when I started exploring getting into legal tech. This is by the third quarter of 2016. And by the fourth quarter of 2016, actually within the third quarter itself, everything happened. Right from the incorporation of the company to me finding my technical co-founder, to me actually deciding what legality should be. Right. Taking a little step back, while I started exploring what should I do in legal tech specifically, firstly the idea was like how I started even before getting a tech co-founder. I just built a basic DIY docs platform where basically there was a simple form. You had to fill that form and agreement would get auto drafted and come to your mail.
So like if you take a step back, obviously there was a problem statement that kind of crept in your mind, which had an origin in optimization of legal processes, right? And obviously you had visibility on it because you were kind of from the same world to some extent. But so if you take a step back and let's kind of talk about legality as a whole in terms of like obviously I said e-sign verification, I said document workflow, but in your own words, what's the key proposition which comes out of legality?
So legality is an e-sign, e-stamp and document workflow solution for Indian businesses. And what we are trying to do is help Indian businesses manage their paperwork without paper. Right? So that involves complete digitization, optimization, and automation of documentation processes.
Right.
Now, when I mean documentation, I mean legal documentation.
Yeah.
And legal documentation is something which is there in any kind of formal transaction, right? Be it whether when you're hiring an employee for a company, when you're raising funds, when you're interacting with third-party merchants, vendors, customers, every formal business
Basically, any contract or
transaction,
agreement which has some legal validity.
Right.
So, and how do you address the problem of customization there, though? Like, I'm guessing everything has little nuances, right? There are like minute specifics, or is that something that you think over time you build, and as it grows, then you can get into customization, or is it like people talk about tailor-made, bespoke contracts, right? How do you sort of address that in the legal field?
Right. So, as a product company, this issue is obviously is a very critical issue. The issue of how much do you customize, what do you customize for, right? And that leads you to a question on who do you want to sell to. And the way we see ourselves as a horizontal company, where we say that whichever kind of business has a problem, has a pain around documentation processes, should be able to use a platform like Leegality and should be able to eliminate paper. Right. So that's the broad focus, that we see ourselves as a horizontal company. We don't see ourselves as a vertical specific company.
Okay.
Right. Now there are two elements to it again, in terms of who do you want to sell to. One is that which size of customers do you want to sell to?
Right.
And second is, even when you say you are a horizontal company, there will be some customers, some verticals which you will be focusing on more, or you will be getting more traction in.
Sure.
Right. So the amount of customization is, I would say, is dependent on these things.
Okay.
Who do you sell to? For us, that is like, even in the horizontal space, we try to sell to large scale financial companies.
Okay.
So even though when I say that we are a horizontal company, there tend to be parts which are more profitable, parts of the market which are early adopters, where the pain point is more, where the reward in terms of money is more. So for us, that is the financial enterprises, right? So the customizations we do, everything we do, firstly they are looked at whether it's useful for a financial enterprise which we have to sell to. Right. Now that doesn't mean that we don't do something which will not matter to a financial enterprise, right? Or only matters to a financial enterprise. We have clients in other spaces as well, which are not financial companies.
They're your first port of call at the moment.
Right. So my customizations as a product company, obviously, the idea is that you standardize the product, that there should be too much of a service component as well. You build something for one company, and that should ideally be usable for all other similar use companies or similar use cases at least.
And that's how you get scale as well, right?
Right. So as a product company, obviously, you end up having some component of services, probably less than 5% of your revenue, but the idea is obviously you have to build whatever, even the services component, you try to make them into a product.
I guess in terms of a model like Leegality, obviously there's a business use case which you identified and you pushed forward, but there must have been a regulatory, I would say, alignment at the right time. That I'm assuming Aadhaar plays a pretty critical role for a proposition like yours. So that probably had a big role to play in terms of, okay, right now the ecosystem is now finally catching up. True. So let's go in, right?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I think timing, as in most, I'm sure, on the internet, we hear most people talking about timing in a startup, right? And I personally believe that's absolutely true. If what we are trying to do was done 10 years earlier, probably wouldn't have been it wouldn't be possible to do that. And probably if we do it 10 years late, it's probably too late. Right. So Aadhaar and the entire ecosystem around Aadhaar authentication, about Aadhaar eKYC, and the entire fintech revolution, the regulatory changes around fintech, around the fintech movement, all of them obviously add up to making the timing perfect. So when we started, the only kind of e-sign we used to offer was Aadhaar e-sign, and that's why our website, which is due for updation, still mostly talks about Aadhaar e-sign, right? And Aadhaar e-sign gets its complete structure and validity from the government, right? So that's always, and even when Leegality was started, the fact that Aadhaar is the existence of something like an Aadhaar e-sign, where the government has recognized, yes, there is a need for digitizing signatures. They made a complete structure for it. which works well, which actually worked well, which seemed very forward looking, for which there are not a lot of parallels. There's some instances in Europe of where signatures are generated using ID cards. But as such, something like an Aadhaar e-sign was something I was like, when I first came across it was mind blowing to me, right? So that I would definitely say that the governmental regulatory ecosystem around it was a big push to like get us to where we are. Right. Not to say that not a lot. It's been a very smooth journey. In the last 3.5 years, our regulatory structure has changed more than 10 times. Especially because like this has been the phase where the entire Aadhaar litigation has been
There's a lot of
happening.
public discourse around it.
Right.
Plus,
so much talking has been happening, right? So, and the government has been responding, sometimes responding well, sometimes not responding too well.
Yeah.
So it's not been a stable environment, but overall, it's definitely been moving ahead. The system is quite much more stable than it was earlier. It's much more clear, and even the bad parts about the ecosystem has helped us in a way that we have realized that there are some things which you want to, like Aadhaar is probably not the only way, right? Aadhaar is probably a gateway, and that can lead to a lot of other types of e-sign, because ultimately a contract, right, in India, even like in any English law jurisdiction, even a oral contract is binding, right? Yeah. Like even if today I say, Nikhil, I will do this for you, you have to pay me 10,000 rupees, and if I do that, but you don't pay me 10,000 rupees, and if I go to court, but I can get someone to just test, like
validate your point.
Yeah. So that still it's an enforceable arrangement, right? So that also, all the ripples in the regulatory ecosystem also made us realize that yes, Aadhaar is a gateway, but there are a lot of other ways in which you can help digitize the paperwork, right? And Aadhaar definitely helps in a lot of use cases. Some companies prefer Aadhaar, their use cases are perfect for Aadhaar, but a lot of use cases are not. Our companies just don't want to use Aadhaar solution.
But right? I mean, like, it's obviously, I'll feign ignorance,
right,
in this department.
Right.
I mean, I assume that probably if you look at the IT Act,
right,
there must be some kind of a guideline, I assume, on what qualifies as a verifiable e-signature protocol. Aadhaar is obviously a core part of it.
True.
But you said that there are some other use cases as well. So how does that work?
Okay. So the IT Act defines something called a digital signature certificate, right? And as per under the entire architecture of the IT Act and its rules, there are two kinds of digital signatures which are acceptable, right? As per the IT Act, which is, one is a USB token based DSC, which all of us use for our MCA GST filings, and the other way is an Aadhaar e-sign. Right? And these are the two kinds of digital signatures which are considered equivalent to a signature by law. So where a law says that this document needs to be signed, and so let's say there is something in the copyright law saying that to be able to do this, you need to get this document signed from the copyright holder, right? And the law uses the word signed. The only way I can meet the requirement is by using an Aadhaar e-sign or a DSC token, right? That's the only way to do it. Right. But let's say we are talking about a general contract. Let's say I'm an NBFC, I give 10,000 rupees to you, right? Now RBI doesn't say that you have to sign a loan agreement. It says that it doesn't even say that you have to have an agreement, right? It advises you to have agreements, it advises you to have digital signatures, but there's no law which says that you need to have a loan agreement which need to look like this, which needs to have this signature, right? So there it's more of a contract thing,
bilateral.
Right? It's bilateral arrangement. Right. So there you don't necessarily need to have a signature to be able to make that agreement valid, right? Because as I said, even an oral agreement is valid as long as you can prove it. So there, for a lot of use cases, what we do is we build solutions where the signing journey happens in a way where there's enough evidence collection that this transaction happens. We maintain the integrity of the information that is signed, and there is an audit trail which lays down all the steps of which happened in the signing journey, and that is also tamper proof. So normally in any kind of signature there are three elements. One is the integrity of the information which is being signed. Second is the first is actually the identity of the signer, knowing who the signer is, whether the signer who is claiming to be he's actually that person. Second is integrity, which is that information which was signed to the from the point it was signed to the point when I'm checking it, the information is still like the integrity of the information is maintained, right? And the third part is non-repudiation, which is basically a legal aspect which says that if you have signed a document, you have made yourself, you will be bound by it, right? What's written in it. So there are these three elements to any kind of signature. Now we just have to ensure that these three elements are there when if we are creating our own signature journey or any kind of non-Aadhaar solution.
So our idea is like, if a transaction is executed through your platform,
right,
you need to check all these three boxes, right, to make sure that it's worthwhile.
So I would say that the customer doesn't need to do that. The customer won't do that. From a product perspective, build a product, we try to do that.
So that the customer gets the comfort at both the ends of the counter.
Even legally, not just for the comfort, even legally, and it's the entire, even the non-Aadhaar solutions we build, everything we build is much more secure than a wet signature, right?
So
signing on paper.
Like I was just kind of the reason why I'm kind of wondering about it is like if you look at like a e-signature solution or an e-stamping solution, that sounds like a very commoditized output, correct? But I guess these extra things is what makes that differentiation within the product. Does it? Is my understanding correct?
So yes, partially yes. But a major part of it comes from just understanding what the Indian law is and what does it take to make a digital document enforceable in court. Right. So there is something called the stamping law in India, like the Indian Stamp Act, right, which says that any agreement that is executed. So Indian Stamp Act, there like different adoptions in every state, and cumulatively the stamp law basically says that any agreement that is executed in India, stamp duty needs to be paid for it.
Okay.
Right. And so the way to do that is you purchase a stamp paper from the government or government authorized vendors and use it attach it to the document, make it a part of the document, and then you sign the document, right? And then you keep it, and when you let's say there's a dispute, you bring the document to the court, the stamp paper validity and everything is validated, it's checked whether it's correctly attached, it's everything is like that needs to be done, right? And that is the only way when a court will actually accept an agreement, right? If it's stamped, because the law says that. At least that's how it's supposed to do. It might not in some cases, but that's how it's supposed to function. Now the issue is that across the country, now this issue falls with the states, like defining stamp duty, how and the procedure is a state subject. So in different states there are different procedures, right? And even in a lot of states issue the traditional physical stamp paper, which is the one printed on paper, which has a 3-line mark and everything. And a lot of states have now gone digital. They claim they're digital and they call it the e-stamp paper, right? But so let's say in Delhi, even when you get a e-stamp paper, you actually get a printed copy, right? It's electronic for the government. For you, it's still a physical paper, right? Haryana is the only state in the country which issues for the end user also the stamp paper is digital, right? For everyone else, the paper is physical, right? And if the law for an enforceable document, the law requires you to have a stamp paper on it, or like let's say even franking done, right? Franking is an alternative to stamp papers where you take a document to a authorized bank or a registrar, and that the registrar or the bank places a mark saying the stamp duty has been paid, which is again a physical process, right? So the issue now becomes is if you want to. The law says that you need to stamp every document, and the governmental structure only allows it to be done in a physical way, right? Now, if you have to take it digital, how do you do that, right? How do you how do you account for stamp duty digitally, right? So this is where our expertise as lawyers, our expertise as having seen technology and law both operate comes in, and here is something where our solutions make a lot of difference, add a lot of differentiation from like especially our international competitors like something like a DocuSign, right? DocuSign and Adobe are the two biggest e-signing players in the world. Both of them, DocuSign is valued at around $10 billion public market capitalization. It's valued at $10 billion. Adobe makes $1 billion a year from this vertical, from the document cloud vertical.
Right.
So they're big companies, right? And they have been trying to sell in India for a while. But because of issues like this, local issues like stamp duty,
state level differences of practices and all that.
Yeah. So that makes a significant difference in adoption, in just making people realize that yes, this can be done digitally. And obviously there are a lot of India specific factors. Like in India, even though the law doesn't say that you have to sign every page, we are in a habit that we will sign every page. Yeah. Law doesn't say that now. Law used to say that you need a seal, but now law says that 2 directors can sign and you don't need a seal. Right. And there are very specific documents on which a seal is required, but we are in a habit that we will use a corporate seal, right? We will say for this company authorized signatory, even that it's
may not matter,
can be scammed so easily, right? It doesn't actually make a difference.
We are in Nehru place, getting a stamp is fairly easy. So.
Yeah.
Tell me about the business though. Like, how do you sort of what is the revenue? Like, do you look at it as a subscription based business, or do you think it can be transactional? And it seems like you have a very B2B sort of focus. Right. Do you think it can be opened up to at a B2C level as well? With a lot of at a retail level, there is legal work, right? I mean, tenant-landlord agreements, which are fairly custom. I mean, don't need a lot of customization. Where do you see sort of next leg of growth, or how do you think about growing the business?
Right. So that's a very interesting question. Something which is usually takes up a lot of my mind space. Yeah. So first, coming to the revenue model.
Yeah.
Our revenue model is 2-tiered. One is an annual subscription fee, and you won't find this on our website because it's due for updation, as I said. Okay. So the first tier is a subscription, annual upfront subscription, based on the kind of plan and features you need, right? Which is the standard SaaS model, where there are a specific number of users, a specific number of templates, there's specific some features, specific kinds of e-sign, which you can. So there are different plans. And you have to, based on the plan you choose, there is a annual subscription fee.
Yeah.
Right. And then there is the second component, which is the transactional fee, which is for the e-sign and the stamping transactions.
Okay.
Right. So for every Aadhaar e-sign that is done, there's a fee we have to pay to the government. For the Aadhaar authentication, there is a fee we have to pay to the certifying authority for the digital signature certificate. Right. So the model is 2-tiered because the structure it's very hard to be a horizontal business and to ensure that with a very simple standard subscription pricing you can accommodate for all variable costs. Right. So our the first year subscription part is more of a value. We see that we benchmark that based on the value we add to the client, and a transactional part is more is a cost plus. Obviously there's some value component, we try to increase the prices and everything every now and then, but the transaction model is more cost plus. Right? So it's a hybrid model, and as I said, we've had to come to it. We have tried a lot of variations, and we have realized that being a horizontal company, as in there are a lot of you sell to a lot of different use cases, right? A lot of different companies. One company, in one use case, there is a big company doing 100 documents a month. In another use case, there is a small company doing 50,000 documents a month. Right? So to be able to account for this wide range, or even more, a big company doing a lot of documents would be the topmost end, right? And again, within the type of for the use case, there might be a different kind of e-sign. Someone uses a stamp paper, someone doesn't want to use a stamp paper.
Because I guess I'm assuming when you look at things like document workflow tools, they kind of fit in very well within the subscription style structure, right? But I guess there must be a lot of your clients who are we kind of depend on you more from a very utilitarian point of view, that we have to transact, we have to do a few documents. We can't pay the entire annual thing.
True. That's one of the biggest issues.
Doc by doc, right?
Right.
And I mean, I guess it's probably when you are at their end also, you kind of probably will understand that perspective as well, right? I mean, it kind of becomes a functional versus a value play.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, in terms of I'm wondering that when you're looking at, you kind of set the scene by saying that you're a horizontally oriented company.
Yeah.
So for you, is the end game, okay, we now know what happens in all the 35, whatever states. We kind of have that internal expertise. We have put those processes on our products. Now it's a penetration game. We do the same thing more and more and more and grow.
Right.
Or the idea is to add verticals and value propositions to this mix. So, I mean, is it a growth? From a growth perspective, is the idea to do what you're doing more and more and more? Or is the idea to go deeper in any particular domain? How are you thinking about it?
So I would say that what you said first is what excites us more.
Yeah. I don't even know what's the penetration of digitization. I assume it's fairly low.
Yeah, it's very low. It's
I mean, intuitively, I think the runway is massive. So.
So we believe that as lawyers we have some specific skill, right? We understand how a document works and what does it take to prove a document in court, right? And this is a problem, in a way a very large problem, but in a way probably a very small problem, right? And this problem is something which everyone has, right? It's not just like only a finance company has it, every company has it. We are sitting in this space, every in this building, every office in this building has that problem, right? They don't realize it. Probably the problem is not too big for them, but it's a problem. So we believe that to be able to scale, we would prefer to stay narrow and go deep, right?
Okay.
We don't want to, at least the way we see it right now. Obviously, in startups, everything is subject to change. But at least the way we see it right now, we believe that the best way to do it is to first build a good business out of it by selling to big enterprises, selling to big use cases, selling to finance, and then gradually penetrating the market.
But is it, I mean, if you, from a pitching perspective, I'm assuming that when you want to get big accounts,
right?
I mean, I was me and Shah often discuss how, in India, you have a $1 billion valuation company which has 500 people.
Right.
And whereas in the US, you might have a $1 billion company which might have 30 people. Right. And the fact remains there might be 200 people who only look at legal compliances and accounting in our country.
Right.
Right. I mean, you have cheap labor. So a lot of big companies a lot of enterprises just get people to deal with these problems. Right. So when you look at big enterprises, which doesn't have lack of people to do, lack of human resources to document or take printouts or file. Transportation costs in India are still fairly low. Sending guys, sending runners with documents. I mean, even in our limited scale, when we have to interact with our CA, we'll often send a runner to send the kagas.
It'll go in the morning. It'll sometimes come back.
I'm sure you deal with those people all the time, right? So you'll have to probably, when you position your product to them, there must be some sort of a cost synergy or some sort of a optimization synergy that you have to pitch.
Right.
How do you go about it?
And also just inertia. Because for a lot of these guys, even if they're big, probably this is the first time value proposition of moving it, digitizing. So how do you sort of address that?
So that's definitely a very interesting question. So our focus, as I said, right now, our biggest focus is finance. Right? Yeah. And even in finance, it's lending. Right? Now, when you have to send one runner to your CA, it's one time a day, probably once a week. Right? Now, a company which is giving 10 lakh loans a month, right? That means, let's say, a 30-page document, for every loan that is given out, there is a documentation that happens, right?
Sure, yeah.
There's an agreement that is executed. It's a fairly 30-50 page document. There are different components to that, right? One is obviously the cost, the pure cost, in terms of just printing paper, just the cost of transportation, the cost of storage, the cost of just having that labor, the cost of everything around paper, right?
And I guess there's some part of it which is mandatory, which is required by law, right? That they have to send, for instance, I'm just wondering, in case of for instance, if I take a mutual, I mean, I know you're talking about lending, but if you look at a mutual fund.
In-person verification, I guess.
I mean, in mutual fund, they always send you statements by post. I don't understand why. I mean, then I was like reading somewhere that there are actually SEBI restrictions which kind of mandate that they need to send something on paper. So, is there a mandatory component in that cost base, especially on the lending side, or no?
Not on the lending side.
Okay.
There's no mandatory base there like that. In some verticals, there is, like in the two-wheeler space, there is some document that need to be submitted to the RTO.
Right. Because in the listed market space, there is a big regulatory requirement. I guess on the lending orientation, there's not, right?
Right. So getting back to the cost, right? There are a lot of cost within cost itself. There are a lot of elements to cost, right? The cost, right from just printing of the cost of paper to printing paper to couriering paper to storing paper to tracking paper. There are a lot of costs associated with paper, which is definitely a very which is not that hard to sell from an optimize in terms of an efficiency perspective, right? But apart from cost, there are a lot of other factors which help us sell, right? And cost is definitely a big one,
right?
But so we claim that overall we bring about 100x efficiency to the process of documentation, not just a 1x, 3x, 10x. We say that we claim that we bring about 100x efficiency, and cost is only a component of it.
Got it.
Right? Now in a loan journey, when we are in a market where everyone is trying to reduce their TATs for loan dispersal, right?
Yeah.
Everyone, the entire pitch of the fintech lending movement is that you apply for a loan and within these many hours we're gonna approve the loan. That doesn't happen, right? Now, in a typical, if that company has to do the paper documentation physically, that means the paper has to go to the actual borrower, or the borrower has to come to them. The paper gets signed. The paper has to be filled, right? The agreement has to be filled. Some human is filling that paper. Some human is actually signing. Obviously, someone is signing the paper. Then someone is transporting the paper, collecting the paper, verifying the paper, and then giving a go ahead that this is fine. And at a lot of instances, there are errors. A lot of times we see that a lot of lending companies have issues that their agents themselves sign the document, right? Or the document never reached their court, or when in their office, or even when the document reaches them, they find a lot of errors. It has to be redone, or when they actually need the document, it cannot be tracked. A lot of issues around that, right?
Yeah.
So coming to the second point of time is definitely something which is, I would say, right now in the market is a bigger selling point than cost. Because when you do in a lending journey, if it takes 7 to 8 days for an entire document to be completed, in our process it happens in less than 2-3 minutes, right? The entire process of not just signature, you have ensured that there are no errors, the document gets filled correctly, documents get signed correctly, documents appropriate people in the organization get notified within appropriately, there's approvals, everything, the entire process gets automated, right? From
so you're looking at it from this is an individual borrower, I assume, right? I mean, these are retail borrowers when it comes to the lending product, correct? Or are you looking at institutional borrowing, SMEs and
so that depends. We serve to all kinds of clients. We have SME lending clients, we have personal loan lending clients, two-wheeler lending clients, machinery equipment clients, working capital, every SME, and we have every kind, right? So this is this time is an issue across sectors, and obviously time is a part of the component. It usually helps us sell the most, but first is cost. And even recently there have been instances where we visited a client's office and the client was we are building this office and it's we have taken this office to store paper, right? And we're having a meeting in that office, so that obviously makes the conversation easier. Second is time, which as I said, it's just the TAT of documents which gets reduced, which is right now the biggest selling point in the market for us, in at least the lending space. In others,
does that make you kind of more the reason I was asking whether they are institutional borrowers is because if you're dealing with an individual borrower, a lot of the individual borrowers would not actually be I would say quote unquote technologically savvy enough to probably interact through a platform. Often if you have to open a bank account as a person, the bank agent will come to your office he's going to not even ask you to fill the form. He's going to do that himself, right? And he'll ask you to sign 20 places. But I guess it's when you are dealing with an institutional borrower, probably a proposition like yours fits in beautifully.
So I would differ a bit. Okay. I would say it. So let's take the individual use case, right? Yeah. Now the individual can be interacting with the financial company, with the lending company in two ways: either digitally or either face to face, right? If the person is interacting digitally, he or she already like has that like digital literacy.
Comfort, right?
If the interaction is happening face to face, it's always an assisted process, right? Even when there is an agent, there are a lot of our clients who still have agents, but the agents carries an iPad or a tablet, and the signing happens on that, right? Got it. So there it's assisted. Even
there also it fits.
Yeah, and even we have clients using it in rural areas also. So it's not been too much of an issue there on that perspective. In fact, like compared to an institutional lending use case or a individual lending use case is more attractive to us because the pain point is larger in all terms, in time, cost, TAT, errors, legal enforceability, just being able to track where the document is. Everything, right?
Plus, I guess from a ticket size perspective, I mean, on an individual loan,
I
mean, the book
ticket size is lower.
Ticket size is lower, so like obviously
more volume for us.
From a customer acquisition perspective, I mean, the bank also wants to optimize
reduce
it more,
costs,
right?
And how do they typically discover you?
So there are different channels. For the first 2.5 years, the discovery was mostly, as in our primary channel was mostly inbound, where we used to like list at the relevant platforms, post articles on the right. At the right places,
content also.
Write a lot of blogs. So it was mostly content driven, content and digital presence driven. And this was before till like around 6-8 months ago. This was the time when we were still achieving product market fit. We also didn't want to go aggressively in the market and reach out to everyone, right? So when like 6-8 months ago, when we were convinced that this is the time that we have reached a certain point in terms of product market fit and that this is the time that we want to scale, is when we started focusing on outbound channels, or non-content, non-digital channels, which is so now a lot of outbound, a lot of LinkedIn outreaches, a lot of reaching out to financial companies through our networks, a lot of cold emailing, cold calling, a lot of events, trade shows, a lot of so now it's a mix of inbound and outbound channels, and there's an equal focus. We still are heavily content driven. There's so that's definitely there.
That'll always be there.
Yeah, it has to be. So, but now the focus is also a lot on outbound channels, and actually a third channel is also partners, which is quite surprisingly, to our astonishment, is working quite well. So we have started to tie up with a lot of vendors in the adjacent markets in the financial space, right? So LOS, loan operating systems, loan management systems, document management solutions, NASH solutions, KYC solutions. So we partner with them. And because when a client is going digital, they want to digitize the entire journeys, different parts of the journey, and just tying up with these vendors or different
it gives you a foot in the door, I guess, right?
For them also, it's a better solution it's easier to pitch both for them, for our partners, and for us. And fourth channel, referrals, has been working quite a lot now.
Because I was wondering, banks have, especially banking institutions, NBFCs, generally they have a lot of inertia, right? I mean, they are difficult organizations to navigate. So best to go through a partner also as a kind of combined proposition. But I mean, if you kind of, I was wondering in terms of things from a regulatory updation perspective. I mean, you guys are kind of well versed in the local legal issues, right? When it comes to e-stamps, when it comes to the mechanics of transactions, those keep on changing, right? So you guys probably have to keep abreast with them and make sure that the product reflects what's there on the ground. How do you deal with that? That's first. Second is, suppose tomorrow, let me be completely, just for being a devil's advocate, if tomorrow the IT Act changes or the UID AI regulations change, how do you hedge against that? I mean, some of it is business risk. If it changes, you have to kind of fix. But I often feel that a document workflow tool that naturally fits like a hedging strategy as well, right? So that your customers are not just dependent on you for the commoditized transaction bit, but also dependent on you from the perspective of document management overall. So like, how do you deal with updation as well as random changes in the regulatory atmosphere?
So first, with regard to updation, obviously a lot of it is network driven. Because we have always, like, even on our WhatsApp, we just, the moment something happens, within 5 minutes we get to know on our WhatsApp groups itself, right? Even like, we don't even need to, like, and you log on to your LinkedIn, you see everything. You regularly keep on checking we have tools scraping websites of just of some regulator just for an update, right? The moment there's an update, we get to know. So those kind of tools are definitely something we use. And our personal networks, just knowing like people who deal with like the kind of laws which impact us, that definitely helps. And so I won't say that has been a big problem. But in terms of your second question, in terms of just dealing with that thought as to what happens if the regulation just suddenly changes tomorrow, and this is something which has happened in the past. At least the threat of it has been quite real a couple of times in the past. So with regard to that, our realization has been that we are in a space where, like, so an agreement is fundamental to a transaction, right? Fundamental to a business transaction. An agreement is not something, this product is not something like a very new product. It's the problem is not something like, it's not a TikTok, right? It's not like there's a product which will work or which might not work, right? There's the problem. The agreement is something which has been there for hundreds of years, maybe in whatever form. At some point it might be, I'm sure, like at some point people used to write things on stone, right? When they were transacting. Then came like thumbprints, then came normal wet signatures. So, and the concept of an agreement is something which is perpetual, right? Which does not change. And everything, so that is the first leg. The second leg, I would say, is everything, like in the last 2 decades, we have seen everything go digital, right? Fortunately, we have been through that era where in the 90s and early 2000s, we saw an entirely different world. And from like probably the second half of the 2000s, we saw everything started going digital. Right? And we are someone, we generally believe that, like, and we not just, it's a very strong belief. I would say that it's not even a question that things cannot remain physical, right? We believe that things have to go digital, and it's just about time. So when you combine these two, a very core, something which will not go away, a problem, a process which is not going away, and a process which is bound to go digital, right? So if you combine both of these, that is something what legality does, right? So
that makes sense,
what the way we see it is, even if IT Act changes, even if something changes, there is something which we can definitely do to work around it, right? And that's why we come up with solutions. We have a lot of non-Aadhaar solutions which are not dependent on the IT Act, which are dependent on the IT Act, but are much less prone to governmental regulation, from the impact of governmental regulation, right?
Yeah, it's like a bet on structured digitization, right? I mean, that's fair. But I also want to quickly speak about, you've managed to raise some money and you were in the market and some of. Do you want to speak a little bit about how your interaction with the investment community has been, and sort of how do they see the story and things that have worked well, and any insights there?
So that's, I would say, the investment journey was probably one of the hardest parts in my journey till now.
Right.
Being so, like, especially because probably 5 years ago it was much easier to raise as a young entrepreneur, right? When there was when people from like IITs just there in their hostels were getting funded, and there was an entire wave that was there around 2015, right? And since the end of 2015, like 2016 since then, the market, the investment community got more sane, right? And you actually need to prove, it was harder to convince, and you actually needed some validation, as you're saying. So from that perspective, for a long time, the question of when we are ready to actually raise was something which bothered me for a long time. At every point, I would be thinking whether this is the right time to raise or not. we were very lean in the beginning, right? It was for a long time, it was just the two, me and my technical co-founder. A lot of our initial clients didn't even know that it's a 2-member company. They probably wouldn't have bought our solution if they knew it was a 2-member company, right? From that perspective, what we realized that raising money only makes sense once we are completely convinced, right? Once we have that product market fit. So till we reached the product market fit, we bootstrapped it. I borrowed some money from my family and put it into the business, and we kept it very, very lean. It was just the two of us, and we were very lean for a couple of years. And once we reached the product market fit, we actually went out and started scouting the market. And and when we started, we obviously went through the entire all different types of channels. We tried to reach out to VCs, we tried to reach out to individual angels, we tried to reach out to lawyers who we knew, we tried to reach out to angel networks, tried tried everything, right? So our realization was that we are in a market where the category definition is still happening, right? Where for a VC to differentiate between what does a DSC company like eMudra, which issues a DSC, how is that different from what we are doing, is something which a lot of VCs are not willing to take a call on, right? They want a clear difference, pre-existing product difference, as in product line existing in the market.
Yeah, they want an anchor to think, right?
So we realized that we probably need to get focus on angels, on individuals who can understand, with whom the problem resonates more, and who are much more willing to take a bet on something like this. So after the first phase, early phase, we decided that VCs are probably not someone we want to talk to at this stage. So then at that time we decided that we're gonna focus on individuals, and from there after talking to we were parallelly talking to a lot of individual angels and angel networks. Our learning was that angel networks is just much more easier to close, right? Because in an angel network, in one of our investors, Mumbai Angels, there are 400, 500 odd investors, and it's when one validation for internal validation for investors is much more easier when there are 10, 50 more people around them validating the product, the business, and reaching to the same conclusion. And it's much more easier. One, validation is much more easier. Second, just pushing, doing the actual mechanics of the transaction, just pushing it from the term sheet stage to money in the bank is much more quicker, because these angel networks already have a structure in place. They already have people whose job is just to follow up with investors and get them to, let's just sign stuff and just push it, right? Which we realize is much harder when we are talking to angels with whom we have a much more personal connect, where probably if we had one individual investor who was willing to bankroll the entire amount, it's much easier. But when you are trying to get 5-10 investors, it takes a lot more, right? Because someone is traveling, someone is not free, someone is
angel network probably gives an intermediary, right? Which
that's the reason why we raised from angel networks, and it's been a good experience. It's been decent. In the mechanics are definitely easier, and in terms of just the sector, the general in investor knowledge about this sector, the general overall in the economy, I would say Indian investors have learned a lot in terms of what it takes to scale a B2C company. Right? But when it applies to B2B or specifically B2B SaaS, the amount of understanding in the market is definitely something which is not of a very good quality, right? And this is very general, generally after talking to all everyone in the market, even the big VCs who claim that they invest a lot in SaaS also don't know much about SaaS, right? If I have an investor, I would prefer to having someone who can tell me what to do, because he's been in that situation, right? So a lot of, because the entire SaaS movement in the country has just started to obviously Zoho and all these companies have been there for a while, but the movement had just started 2-3 years ago. So the investor maturity is still for B2B SaaS is still in its early stage. There are a lot of good investors out there who are willing to work with you, who are willing to like understand it with you.
Yeah.
But I would say like it's at the same time it's also quite hard because the metrics, the general understanding of the investor community in India is based on the B2C market, which is you push in some money and you get a specific reward, right? In a B2B business, it's much more harder. Like the money to reward ratio, the input, how much money you put into the business to how much money you immediately get out of it, how much traction you get is different. It takes much more time, but it's much more stable, sustainable. There's much more cash generating, much more like we don't have the concept of like per transaction burn, right? In B2C, there's nothing like that. In B2B, sorry, right? So these kind of parts are something which I hope the investor community in India can quickly catch on to in the next 2-3 years.
But like you mentioned, e-mudra in between, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from a competitive dynamics perspective, like there are a few companies, right? Like there's Digio, there's Legal Desk, and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you also mentioned that from a differentiation perspective, in the beginning, especially when the product market fit was in progress, one would often like pigeonhole a company like yours into same bucket as an e-mudra, right? So is that something which you see changing gradually? Is that a function of higher awareness, or like what exactly makes sure that differentiation comes across? Or is it just a question of you positioning it in a different way?
So it's definitely been changing, and I would say so. And obviously, with regard to positioning, we have obviously been trying a lot to ensure that the positioning is such that it cannot be confused. But the way based on what we have realized, more than the positioning, what is helping us is just like being able to show how the product is so different, right? And the kind of problem it solves, the depth in which it solves the problem. Once people see it, once we go and give demo to a financial company in their office, once they've seen the product, there's no way they're gonna confuse it with a DS. What e-mudra does of like by signing a DSC, right? So I think like it's more awareness that is coming because of like that, which is organically happening because of our growth is definitely helping, and positioning is obviously a part of it, but just being able to see how it is different is making more of a difference.
Educating the customer or client will
so you basically carry an iPad in your bag all the time, ready to take it out whenever you see a potential lead coming in.
So I am not an Apple fan, so
sure. Some kind of portable device.
So he didn't question the tablet part, he questioned the brand. So I guess that is pretty much on there. I think we have hit an hour, and that was I think a good note to end today's chat. What do you think?
I just had one question which I forgot to sneak in was with all your fundraising efforts, I hope you're using your own Leegality channel to do the paperwork.
So all our documentation is done. Even our SHA was executed digitally. Even like Mumbai Angels, who our investor now, they do all their deals, SHAs through our platform.
There you go. So that's a good nod of approval. That's a good way to end today's session. Listen, I had a really good time learning about the business. So thanks a lot for your time.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating world. I think documentation is something which is like a necessary evil. And that from that perspective, looking at legality as a solution has been quite fascinating. So no, thank you for your time, Shivam. And to all our listeners, as usual, I hope you enjoyed this session. Do drop in your comments, your feedback. If any of you wants to come over as a guest, feel free to give us a shout.
You have to make it through our highly tactical and
filtration process. Yes,
vetting mechanism.
Yes, we have a very competitive process, I assume. So, but yeah, with that, I think we can kind of sign off, right? This is Nikhil Arora.
This is Sharad Tupran
signing off.